Hi, my name is Jake Butler, and this is my review of It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life was released on December 20th, 1946, and was directed by Frank Capra and stars James Stewart, Donna Reed, Lionel Barrymore, among others. Now, if you're anyone who even remotely likes Christmas or Christmas movies, I probably don't need to recap the plot because chances are you already know about this film. Or at least you think you do. It's a Wonderful Life has so deeply ingrained itself into our pop culture as a movie that is synonymous with the holiday season. So even though I had never seen the film, I thought I knew enough about it. A man down on his luck wishes he was never born, so an angel sent from heaven visits him and shows him what the world would be like if he was never in it. Sounds pretty familiar, right? Well, if you've actually seen the film, then you know where I'm going with this. But if you're like me and you only know the film through its cultural impact, but haven't actually seen it, you may be surprised to learn that this storyline is actually only the last 30 minutes of this 130-minute film.
Wait a minute, that's an idea. What do you think?
I think there's a very interesting discussion to be had on how an art piece can have such a deep impact on culture that it essentially changes the art itself. The idea that less than a quarter of a whole piece of media becomes such a historic part of our media mythology, while the roughly 1 hour and 40 minutes of the rest of the film kind of remain in obscurity for those who haven't seen it. Unfortunately, this is strictly a review of the film's technical and literary merits, so let's talk about that.
Hey, that's pretty good.
This is a very interesting film. In addition to its cultural misperceptions, it's a film that kind of defies genre. Or you could say it's a combination of a bunch of different genres, which I think could mean the same thing, and in this particular instance, I think it does. There are, of course, the fantastical elements with regards to the angel Clarence and the straight-up magic he does on Earth. Interestingly, these fantasy aspects play no important role on the plot until the third act of the movie, which is something I've never really seen before. Either you usually go all in, or leave it as a tag at the end, maybe, which is something characteristic of Christmas movies. This film also has some comedic aspects. It has very clever writing. In fact, it has more interesting dialogue than either of the films I've reviewed up to this point. There are some legitimately clever bits in this film, like the gate gag or the hat joke.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I feel so good, I could spit in Potter's eye. I think I will. What'd you say? Huh? No, maybe I better go home. Where's my hat? Oh, thank you, George. Which is mine?
The metal one.
Oh.
Of course, this is still a relic of its time. There's a joke about a half hour into the film where George accidentally steps on Mary's robe. It comes off and she hides in a nearby bush. George holds the robe hostage as a joke while Mary sits naked in a bush. I'm not sure if I was supposed to think that this was creepy or endearing. I think it was supposed to be endearing, but really I just found it pretty creepy.
I'll call the police.
They're way downtown. They'd be on my side, too.
Then I'm going to scream.
Maybe I could sell tickets. No. Let's see. No, that. The point is, in order to get this robe, I've got it. I'll make a deal with you, Mary.
Then there are the corporate real estate conflicts, which are the main driving force of most of the plot. And I think if you took away the fantastical third act and wrote a more grounded ending, you'd still be left with a pretty interesting and compelling story. Not that the fantasy elements make the film any worse, but there are some things I want to talk about involving the third act that do bother me. And I want to bring it back to the writing. In the third act of the film, the way George as a character is written makes kind of a dramatic shift. He becomes kind of dumb. He's pretty dumb. I mean, he explicitly wishes that he was never born, and then he encounters all these bizarre changes to his reality, like Martini's Bar becoming Nick's. The town he lives in changed its name from Bedford Falls to Pottersville. And all of this after he met an enigmatic man who told him that he was his guardian angel. George makes no connection that this new reality has anything to do with his wish that he never existed. Even after the angel Clarence spells it out for him, George still doesn't understand that he was never born and keeps going and seeing people from his old life who don't know him anymore. And it just goes on for too long. Beyond that, George's wish in the first place, of course, as we as the audience know, all of these terrible things that are now happening to George are because of Potter, essentially stealing $8,000 from the building and loan. But even without that fact, George actually believes that the world would be better off if he was never in it. which is frustrating since we've spent the whole film watching him do all of these good and selfless things for his community. Everybody in this town loves George Bailey, but he selfishly can't see that. After just one bad day, George Bailey parts from all of the character development we've seen from him.
I suppose it'd been better if I'd never been born at all.
What'd you say?
I said I wish I'd never been born.
Oh, you mustn't say things like that.
Admittedly, there had to be a whole lot of other building blocks that were pretty loosely stacked for the rest to come tumbling down, and you do have the fact that George is really not living the life that he wanted for himself. Still, it's hard to believe that someone who just risked his life to save a stranger who fell in the river honestly believes that the world would be better off without him. It defies the logic of his character that they've spent an hour and 40 minutes building. Now, getting back to genre, there are, of course, religious undertones and overtones in this film. I mean, it is a Christmas movie. There are many overtly Catholic and Christian elements, like the fact that the film opens with people praying to God for George, and later when George himself prays, and of course the literal angel that is a major character. Even down to the small things, like George's wife being named Mary, or when George accidentally calls the angel Clarence Gabriel. But there are also a lot of religiously ambiguous visual representations that are shown in this film. Mainly, I'm talking about an effect which actually helped this film win an Academy Award for visual effects. The narrator of our main plot is shown in the form of talking galaxies and stars. When you see it today, it's not an incredibly complicated effect, even without a computer, but it was pretty creative for the time and did win this film an Academy Award, so it's worth mentioning. Now, we know that the star that they're talking to is the angel Clarence, but what are the galaxies? Are they gods? Other angels? Why are those angels galaxies while Clarence is just a star? Is it because they're higher class angels? Clarence does say that he's just a second class angel. Or is it some kind of other higher power that this film is exploring? Well, that's up to interpretation from the viewer. If you want to stick to the biblical interpretation, since this is a Christmas movie, I guess you could say that there are other angels, but again, it's up to interpretation. Now, coming up to the end of the film, I think there are some ways to view it that makes the writing seem like a disconnected mess, from the mishmash of genres to the complete 90-degree turn the plot takes in the third act to its resolution.
Merry Christmas!
When George comes back to his own reality, he still comes back to a plethora of life-ruining problems that aren't solved just by realizing your own worth. There are still some pretty big financial and personal problems that he left behind, all of which are solved at once by some deus ex machina phone calls that Mary made. But I want to take some time to defend this ending. I don't think that this was some magical plot device that the writers used to solve all of their problems. I think it's the thing that they had set up from the beginning. Yes, it all comes together pretty quickly and leaves you with a bit of whiplash, but it's the whole point of the plot, and it's the Christmas miracle of this Christmas movie. The lesson in this film is that everyone's life matters. Everyone makes an impact on the people around them, even if they don't believe it. One life can change so many others. George spent his whole life giving up what he wanted to save his community, and in the end, he got to see that come full circle and be saved by his community. He gets to see all these people that he saved from a tyrannical landlord come back and help him in his darkest hour. Because that's the true meaning of Christmas. It's community. It's about giving back to all the lives that have made an impact on you along the way. If there's anything that you can take away from this film, it's that in the end, it's always better to have lived a life than to have never existed, because it's a wonderful life. And also the fact that I freaking love this song, Auld Lang Syne. And that concludes my thoughts on It's a Wonderful Life. Thank you.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
That's right. That's right.
Attaboy, Clarence.